You've heard it 100 times. Start your story with a hook, start with action, start with the inciting incident. And so naturally, that's what you do. You drop your readers right into the scene, something big happens, and the story is in motion. Except it still doesn't land the way bestsellers do. So you tweak the first line, you change the setting, God forbid you rewrite the first chapter over and over again, and still something's missing. If you're the kind of writers who's always second guessing where your story should start, if you've rewritten your first scene more time than you're willing to admit and still can't explain why it doesn't work, this video might be the breakthrough you've been waiting for. So if best-selling authors don't start with the inciting incident, what do we do instead? They start with something called the threshold prelude, a 3-step structure that explains why so many strong ideas still fall flat on page 1. And once you know how it works, you'll stop rewriting your first chapter over and over and start designing an opening that will level up your entire novel. If you're new here, hey, I'm Julian, former storytelling consultant for brands and entrepreneurs turned writing coach for aspiring authors. If you dream of writing a novel so beautiful that your readers will finish it and immediately want to start over, consider subscribing. On this channel, I share all the storytelling frameworks that I've developed over the years to help writers like you make that dream come true with structure, clarity, and zero vague advice. And if you want to go deeper with what I'm sharing today, I've put together a free Threshold Prelude workbook. It is designed to help you apply each of the 3 steps to your own story as you write or as you revise, so you can grab your copy using the link in the description down below. Right, so what is the Threshold Prelude? Let's clear something up. It is not a prologue. It doesn't jump years into the past. It is not buried in world building or in childhood backstory. And before you ask, no, your novel doesn't necessarily need a prologue to begin well. But it does need a threshold prelude, which is something else entirely. And this is where best-selling authors do the real work of pulling readers in, not by mimicking chaos, but by building resonance. And we do that in 3 steps, each step revealing a deeper layer of your protagonist before the inciting incident even happens. And to really understand how the threshold prelude works, we need to zoom out just for a second and look at the methods that underpins everything that I teach here on the channel, the storytelling pillars. Now, if you've been a friend of the channel and you're thinking of skipping this recap, I see you, but trust me, you'll want to hear this to connect the dots and make the most of what's coming next, but I'll keep it tight, I promise. So if you're new or if you haven't skipped the recap, the storytelling pillars is a flexible modular framework that is designed to reconcile plotters and pantsers. So if you're a plotter, it gives you structure that's not only solid, but detailed and scalable. So you can basically go as granular as you want, layering your storytelling across multiple dimensions to craft a novel that's not only well built, but unforgettable. And if you're a pantser, it doesn't box you in. It gives you a torch and a map. You can still explore your story pretty much intuitively, but you're not wandering in the dark. You're basically Lara Croft with a manuscript. And at the core of these methods are 6 structural forces called the storytelling pillars. First, you have the inciting incident, so something happens that breaks the status quo and throws everything off balance. Then you have the progressive complications that are meant to escalate the stakes of the story and build narrative tension. The turning point, which is the final complication that forces a shift and imposes to your characters a point of no return. The next pillar is the moment of crisis and contemplation, which is when your characters face a Cornelian dilemma and neither path is really easy. Then you have the climax, which reveals through action which choice has been made, followed by the resolution, where we see the consequences of that choice and something internal or external has changed. Now, those 6 pillars don't just show up once and we call it a day, they repeat throughout your story, but here's the thing. The role that they play depends on where you are in the story. The storytelling pillars are applied across 6 different levels, but you don't need to worry about all of them right now. I'm building out a full playlist where I cover each one so you can go deeper whenever you're ready. But in this video, we're zooming in on just one level, the second one, which is called the parts of your story. And within that, there are 4 essential parts. Each one plays a different role in unfolding your narrative. And yes, the function of each pillar shifts depending on the part you're working on. But for this video, we're staying focused on just one part, the very beginning of your novel, the trigger part. So here's where it gets interesting. The trigger part doesn't start with the inciting incident, and it doesn't just hold the usual 6 pillars. It starts 3 steps earlier with what's called the Prelude Pillars, a structural sequence that happens before the plot even begins. And these 3 prelude pillars aren't optional. They're the emotional foundation that makes the rest of your structure work. Because if you skip them, you're basically asking your readers to care without even giving them a reason to. So let's break them down one step at a time. And to make them easier to track, imagine your protagonist stepping into a lift. Starting at the emotional basement of your story, each floor they rise reveals something deeper, more flawed, more human, until they reach the ground floor where the dual storyline begins, where the real journey starts. So let's start with step 1, the emotional basement of your story, the moment of crisis and contemplation of the threshold prelude. As we saw earlier, this moment always follows a turning point. So when your novel opens here, you're basically signaling to the readers that something has just happened off the page that left your protagonist facing a dilemma. Not just a situation, a decision. But here's the thing, they're not ready to make that decision. They're suspended in it, they're thinking, avoiding, rationalizing even, and the thoughts running through their head, they are flawed. Why? Because they don't see their own patterns yet. They still believe that the problem is out there, is the job, is the other person, is the unfair situation, anything really, as long as it is not them. They think they're just responding to the world, not realizing that they are stuck in a loop that they haven't learned to see yet. This is where the internal conflict becomes visible. It's the first moment your readers meet your protagonist before change begins. It is the opening image of your novel, and it matters more than most writers realize. Because this moment doesn't just say, here's where they are, it says, here's who they think they are, and who they might become. That's why this image should also mirror the final image of your story, so the readers can see visually, emotionally, narratively, just how far your protagonist has come. And if you're writing a series, then yes, it should also echo the final image of the last installment, not just for cohesion, but for emotional continuity, both within each book and across the entire arc. Now, some writers won't know what that opening image needs to be until they've written the whole draft. And that's totally valid, especially if you're more of a pantser. You may not figure out how to open the book until you've reached the very end. And if that is you, you don't need to start from scratch. What you've written so far got you here. It brought the story into focus. What I mean with this video is not for you to rewrite everything. It's about recognizing what the beginning needs to hold now that you understand what the story is really about. So even if you change the details later, the emotional message will stay the same. Because this moment, this first step, isn't driven by action. It's driven by tension, by a character who hasn't moved yet, but can't stay where they are either. This is your protagonist standing in the quiet before the disruption, still believing they can keep things the way they are. And that's where your story begins. Let's take Harry Potter for example. The off-page turning point is when the clock strikes 12, the exact moment when the magical world is finally allowed to reach out to him. But we don't open with that moment, we open in the crisis and contemplation that follows it. Harry is living with the Dursleys, treated like an outsider, a burden, someone who doesn't quite belong anywhere. There's no decision being made yet, just emotional stasis. This is the opening image of Harry Potter, a boy who believes he's nobody, living in a world that reinforces that belief every single day. Now, if we look at the Hunger Games, the off-page turning point is the day of the reaping. In the book, we open with Katniss waking up in District 12. The poverty of the Seam surrounds her. She illegally hunts in the wood, the only way her family can survive. Then that muttered line, District 12, where you can starve to death in safety. This is the opening image. A girl resigned to harsh reality because resignation is required for survival. She's not questioning the system, not yet, she's just enduring it. So for this first step of the threshold prelude, ask yourself, what's the emotional illusion my protagonist is still clinging to? What decision are they avoiding? And does my opening image reflect the inner conflict they haven't faced yet? Now, before we move on, just a quick clarification. Each of these 3 steps of the threshold prelude represents a storytelling pillar, not necessarily a full scene. You might show all 3 in one tight chapter, but you might as well stretch them out across several moments. But it all depends on the pacing and the tone of your story. What matters is the emotional progression, not how many chapters it takes to get there. Right, so step 2 or floor -2 is the climax of the threshold prelude. It is not the climax of your story, but it is the moment in this emotional prelude where your protagonist makes a choice, and that choice isn't random. It shows us exactly who they are right now before the story challenges them to change. They're not making this choice because it's right, they're making it because it fits their flawed logic that they're still living by. It is a choice shaped by fear, by pride, by the illusion that if they keep doing what they've always done, they'll finally get what they want. This is where the internal conflicts become action. Not loud, explosive action, but a clear move that reveals the patterns they're stuck in. And for this pillar, there are 3 key areas that you want to touch. At home, so how they connect or disconnect from the people closest to them. At work, so how they navigate ambition, hierarchy, or even self-worth. And in their free time, so how they escape, perform, numb out, or pretends everything's fine. And again, it doesn't need to be 3 big scenes. You can show all of it in a handful of well-placed moments if those moments are doing the right work. This is how you introduce the protagonist's world, and more importantly, how they cope with that world. So with that step, you're giving the reader context. But even more than that, you're giving them contrast, because when the inciting incident hits, this world is what will be disrupted. And this choice made here on floor -2 is what will no longer make sense once the real story begins. This is where you introduce the characters from your protagonist's status quo's world, the one who define their current normal, so that could be family, friends, could be colleagues, rivals, bosses, basically people who reinforce the loop. These are commonly called A-story characters, the ones connected to the external plot. And only later you'll introduce the B characters, the one connected to the emotional journey. So if we go back to our lift analogy, it's pretty much having your protagonist stepping out of that lift onto floor -2. They look around and they start walking with your reader like a tour guide in a museum. Over here, that's my partner. We don't really talk about what matters really, but it's fine, totally fine. And that one, that's my boss. He's polite to my face, but he's the reason why I wake up every morning with anxiety. Oh, and this is my Tuesday night ritual. 2 glasses of wine, a show that I've probably seen 10 times already, and the vague hope that tomorrow won't be exactly the same. Now, sometimes there are crossovers. Take the Hunger Games, for example. Peeta is technically part of Katniss's starting world, but emotionally, they're strangers. We don't really meet Peeta until later when the story demands something new from Katniss. The key is this. By the end of this floor, the end of step 2, your reader should understand what your protagonist is holding onto, what they think will fix things, and why that belief is going to unravel once the real story starts. This moment doesn't just build sympathy, it builds the contrast that will make their transformation visible. Because if they stayed there, if they kept doing things this way, it's only a matter of time before everything breaks. In Harry Potter, the climax happens at the zoo. Harry speaks to a snake and the glass vanishes. For us, the reader, it's our first real taste of magic. But for Harry, this isn't a conscious choice really. It's driven by an unconscious emotional need, connection. But in a story where the theme revolves around good versus evil, that first magical connection isn't random. It's a warning sign. We don't know the implication yet, the partial tongue, the Voldemort connection, and the darkness that will follow Harry throughout his journey. This is the flood action. Harry reaching for connection in a way that hints at the darkness he'll have to confront, not just in Voldemort, but in himself. In the Hunger Games, the climax is the act of hunting and what comes with it, emotional suppression. Not only does she risk public execution every time she crosses into the wood, but she tells the reader that she's learned to hold her tongue. She says, "When I was younger, I scared my mother to death. The things I would blurt out about District 12, about the people who rule our country, Panem, from the far-off city called the capital. Eventually, I understood this would only lead us to more trouble, so I learned to hold my tongue and to turn my features into an indifferent mask so that no one could ever read my thoughts." That's the flood action, not just the illegal hunt, but a choice to bury her emotions, to survive by shutting herself off. She thinks it's keeping her family safe, but in reality, it's keeping her alone. So ask yourself, given the dilemma your protagonist faced in the previous moment, what choice are they making now? Is that choice driven by fear, pride, denial, or any other flaw? Quick note here, if you've watched the video on the internal conflict equation, then ask yourself, is that choice driven by their psychological need or psychological wound? What do we think this choice will solve, and how does it show that they haven't understood the problem yet? And through home, work, or whatever they use to escape, how do we see that their life can't keep running this way? Alright, last step, floor -1, the resolution of the threshold prelude. At this point, the protagonist has already made a choice, one rooted in their flaw, their fear, their false belief, or psychological need. And now we see the consequences of that choice begin to unfold. Not in a big dramatic way, but in a way that says that this isn't going to work. And worse, it's already doing damage. This is often where the protagonist feels misunderstood, embarrassed, frustrated, or maybe just a little too proud to admit that something didn't land right. And then right in that moment, someone says something. Not a major character, not a mentor, usually just a side character, a colleague, a neighbor, a classmate, just someone who's close enough to comment, but not close enough to be taken seriously. And what do they say? They say the theme of your story. Whispered, not delivered. It might come as a question, a passing observation, a joke, a warning, a brush off, but it's the right thing said at the wrong time. And your protagonist, they're going to ignore it because they're not ready to change, at least not yet. This is what makes them feel real to your readers, because people don't transform just because somebody told them, hey, maybe you should change. They change because life forces them to, through disruption, failure, and pain. That part comes next. For now, the theme is just a seed. It's there, it's been said, and it will be ignored. In Harry Potter, Harry comes back home and is punished. The Dursleys are terrified, though we don't fully understand why yet. It's our first hint at the turning point coming in the trigger part. But Harry is confused, ashamed, and silenced. And then Vernon delivers the theme, wrapped in a warning about identity suppression. Magic is dangerous, being different is dangerous, and Harry needs to stay small, stay invisible, stay normal. In the Hunger Games, the theme of survival versus freedom is whispered in Gale's suggestion.
We could do it, you know. Take off, live in the woods, it's what we do anyway.
Katniss doesn't know what to make of it, not because she doesn't freedom, but because of her immediate responsibilities to both Prim and their mother. And so the theme is whispered and ignored. This is what closes the emotional loop of the Threshold Prelude. It shows us the cost of the choice made in step 2, it gives us a glimpse of the truth your story will be trying to teach, and it leaves your protagonist right where they need to be, stuck but about to be shaken. So ask yourself, what are the consequences of the flawed choice my protagonist made in the previous step? How do those consequences start to chip away at their current reality or hurt the people around them? Who delivers the theme of the story in this moment, and why does the protagonist ignore it? Is that message subtle enough to feel natural, but clear enough to be remembered later? Now that you've built the emotional foundation, it is time to structure the rest of the trigger part, the moment your protagonist's world is about to be flipped on its head. That's what we'll cover in the next video. You can watch it by clicking right here, and if it's not ready yet, I'll put the course playlist instead, so make sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss it when it drops. And before you leave, don't forget to grab the Threshold Prelude workbook in the description. I'm Julian Maylet, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.